On September 16th, 1992, at approximately 3:45 p.m., 8-year-old Katie Laring left the Becker residence at 265 Harper's Way. She was on her bike, described by her mother as pink with white and purple stickers on it. According to Erica Becker, her piano teacher, with whom Katie had been most of the afternoon, Katie rode south in the direction of her home directly after leaving the house. The search began at 7 p.m. with police and volunteers scouring the woods which surrounded the Laring property. Katie's parents were too distraught to join the search party the first day, but were insistent on taking part for the following 3 days and nights. On the fourth day, Mr. Laring did not join his wife. He spent the night at a bar just outside of town, coming home only to pack his bags. He left without conversation, simply telling his wife he couldn't live there anymore and had nothing to offer but his grief. Though the police suspected him, his wife never did. Mr. Laring left against the advice of his lawyer. His body was found only 2 days later, a few miles west. He had died of an opioid overdose and was found in his car. 2 weeks after the disappearance, Mrs. Laring saw her daughter sitting on the living room couch. She'd been woken by a sudden nausea and was headed to the bathroom. The girl, who was barely visible in the dark, did not respond to her mother's calls. Mrs. Laring claims she believed this to be her daughter's ghost. There was nothing of life in her at all, she would later tell police. Yet she knew it was Katie, and so she approached, an arm out ahead, dreading the moment when the phantom would vanish. Before reaching out, she noted the girl's size. She seemed to be twice as big as Katie, and yet Mrs. Laring recognized her. To her astonishment, when her hand reached the girl, it was not shadow or cold air she felt on her palm, but flesh. It was not a ghost, but Katie's decomposing corpse that sat upright, mouth agape, in the living room now. The nausea she felt had been due to the smell. It would take her another 2 days to call the police. I couldn't let them take her away again, she would later recount in the local newspaper. The rumors started soon after. At first, everyone was sorry for her. Such a cruel thing for the killer to do, to bring her own dead daughter's body back in such a state. But concern turned to fear when some began to question whether that was what happened. Maybe she had found her daughter's body in a shallow grave in the woods and dug it up herself. Or still, some pondered if maybe she was the one who killed her in the first place. The police never charged her or anyone else with the girl's death or the body's desecration. There wasn't enough evidence for either. The autopsy concluded the girl died of a cardiac arrest, but the body was too deteriorated for further analysis. It wasn't long before the town turned on the mother, shunning her from society entirely. For months, no one spoke to her. The only contact she had was with the mailman, who couldn't help but stay and chat when she would make conversation. She was desperate to connect, he claimed when speaking to reporters. He continued, "For what it's worth, I never felt anything dark from her. If I had any thought that she'd killed her daughter, I wouldn't have felt a single ounce of pity for the woman." "4 months later, Mrs. Trumbo passed away in her sleep. She was 89 and had been ill for some time. The funeral went as expected, friends and family, hushed conversations. 14 days later, her body was found sitting at the kitchen table of her daughter's home. She had been embalmed and was much better preserved than Katie Laring. Her daughter, who had found her, had no answers for the police. She moved out of town less than a month later. The townspeople's fear of Mrs. Laring became a general fear, which infected every part of daily life, and was the talk of almost all conversations with no assailant or perpetrator to point to. There had been no desecration of the grave site. Investigators had to exhume the coffin. It was shut, the inside clean. No marks or scratches on the wood. There were no signs that there had ever been a body inside. Some even went on to call the burial a hoax. To those who had not been at the cemetery, believing this was a comfort. But for the ones who had attended, there was no such relief. They watched the body lowered into the earth with their own eyes. For them, there was no explanation. The investigators checked the funeral home for signs of foul play, but even then they admitted it would only serve as evidence of Mrs. Trumbo's case, not Katie Laring's. Regardless, no such evidence was found. When a third death was announced in the town paper, the entire town was on pins and needles. The funeral was sparsely attended, with all eyes glancing at the body for signs of movement. The wife of the deceased, a Mrs. Henry, insisted on being present as the casket was closed, and every inch of the way from the funeral home to its final resting place at McKinley Cemetery. She was at her husband's side the entire time, and when asked by a local reporter how she felt, she told him she was confident nothing strange would happen, explaining that after the body was lowered into the grave, she had paid a construction company to pour cement over the coffin. She even joked that she would have simply cremated him if he had not hated the idea while he was alive. Demand for cremations rose over 200% in the following months. Mrs. Henry's precautions seemed to have worked, but none of the town's residents seemed willing to risk it. 9 months after Mr. Henry's burial, just as the stories were becoming a memory, Mrs. Henry woke to find her husband's remains lying beside her in bed. Investigators concluded he had been lying there for at least 6 hours before he was discovered. The concrete grave remained untouched. The exhumation, which took 2 days, revealed an intact coffin, same as the previous cases. With no leads to follow, the 2 detectives assigned to the case went back to Mrs. Laring, who refused to speak to them, stating that when she was grieving most, the police had only treated her as a suspect. As they were leaving the property, she reminded them that there was no evidence a human being had killed her daughter. When they asked what she believed it had been that took her, she said she had no earthly idea what it was, but she knew where it lived. In the woods, she said, pointing to the trees surrounding her backyard. She told them she heard it every night since she had found her daughter's corpse, laughing. Every night, save for when the bodies of the dead were discovered in their homes. Those nights, she told the detectives, were the only times there was no laughing behind the trees.
Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you want to stay up to date on new content, then please subscribe and be sure to hit the bell to be notified on new content. I was new in town and had just found a new job in the local diner. I didn't mind the late hours and plus it was extra money for me to buy the latest computer games and style I wanted to buy. I loved shopping, so as I worked in the diner, I just felt happy about getting my wage pack on Friday. I hopped on the bus to get my bus ride home, and as I got into the bus, I spotted a creepy looking guy sitting in the back. It was late and I was on my own, but at least the driver was on the bus with me, and this creepy man also. It wasn't just me and him. I felt weird still. I felt like the guy's eyes were piercing through me, even though I couldn't see him. I just tried to relax and enjoy the bus ride home as much as I could in this strange situation. I then told myself, wait, I'm just on a bus with a weird-looking guy who is probably harmless. Nothing has happened. I looked behind and felt a shiver run through me, as I could have sworn he moved up a seat closer to me. I couldn't be sure, but when I turned around again, I knew for certain, as he was right behind me, sitting in the seat, smiling with such a sinister smile. I turned around and ignored him and didn't look back. When I got home, I could see my dad's paper resting on the sofa, and I got such a fright when I saw the same creepy man's face staring up at me. And reading the headline, it said, "The man had been killed by a bus on the exact same bus route I took." I had then realised the man who was on the bus with me was a ghost. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you want to stay up to date on new content, then please subscribe and be sure to hit the bell to be notified on new content. Matthew was a bright kid. He had his good points and was even actually caring and could be very helpful when he wanted to be. But he fell down in one big way. He always used to love to play stupid pranks on people. And these pranks really started as just silly pranks at first, like maybe putting a bucket of iced water over a door that he knew his friend would walk through. And one time he put a rat in a gift box for his friend. He used to get a kick out of pranking people, and it got him into a lot of trouble over the years. But it was one day when he was older, and he should have known better, he did the most dangerous and stupid prank of all. Actually, it couldn't even be called a prank. It was just crazy, reckless, dangerous, and stupid. He was standing up on the top of an apartment he lived in, way up high at the top of a skyscraper, and he decided to see what would happen if he left a sharp knife fall from the top. The knife fell down and eventually, before hitting the ground, unfortunately hit a guy and killed him stone dead. Matthew didn't intend to hurt anyone, but he sure as hell wasn't going to admit it was him, and he sure didn't want to get caught for murdering someone. So he just kept his mouth shut. Little did he know there was a woman looking at the whole thing across the way with a pair of binoculars. The next day the woman was telling the mom of the dead boy, "I am very sorry to tell you this, but I know who killed your son." A few days later, Matthew was walking into his apartment, and the light wasn't working. He fell over some wire. He landed on lots of knives that were fixed into a plank of wood and died from loss of blood as the knives plunged through his body and head. The mom of the boy that Matthew killed smiled when she saw Matthew in a pool of blood. She was glad her plan of revenge worked. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you want to stay up to date on new content, then please subscribe and be sure to hit the bell to be notified on new content.